It was an ordinary morning. Coffee in hand, the day had barely begun, and I could already hear the same phrase, "What a horrible day this is going to be." It was not from a stranger. It was my own voice, in the mirror, for myself. At that time I complained about everything: traffic, work, the electricity bill, the noisy neighbor, the rain, the sun, the heat, the cold. If there was a competition of who found the most reasons to complain in a single day, I would be Olympic champion, and I wouldn't even realize I was competing. But there's one thing that no one told me. One thing that psychology has known for decades, that spirituality has been whispering for centuries, and that most people discover too late or never discover at all. Every word you utter about your life is a command you're giving to the universe. Does it seem exaggerated? Wait. To be continued here, because there is a real, studied, documented phenomenon that happens inside your brain every time you open your mouth to complain. It is not a metaphor. It's not shallow self-help talk. It's neuroscience. It's behavioral psychology. It is the silent mechanism that determines, much more than effort, much more than talent, the size of the life you will build. And worst of all, most people who are destroying themselves with their own mouths don't know they're doing it. He thinks he is being realistic. She thinks she's being honest. He thinks that that's how it is, or that life is really hard, so it's better to tell the truth right away. But what if I told you that this honesty is working like a slow-acting poison? That every "it's never going to work out," every "I'm unlucky," every "nobody values me," every "my life is garbage," is every one of these phrases being recorded, processed, and executed by the most powerful system there is, your own mind. There's fascinating research from Stanford University that showed that the human brain doesn't clearly distinguish between a lived experience and an experience repeatedly, described with emotion. In other words, when you say every day that your life is difficult, with feeling, with conviction, your brain begins to build a reality that confirms exactly that. He doesn't question it. He obeys. You're not describing your life, you're prescribing it. And this is where the spiritual aspect that most people treat as superstition comes in, but which, surprisingly, finds a direct echo in modern science. The world's oldest spiritual traditions, from completely different cultures, on continents separated by oceans, have all come to the same conclusion. The mouth is one of the most dangerous tools that human beings have. Not because it makes noise, but because it creates reality, and what you're going to find out in this video will bother you. Because it's not comfortable to realize that much of what's wrong in your life may have started inside you, not outside, not in the fault of others, not in bad luck, not in fate. Who is in Commodore? There will be libertarians. In the next few minutes, you'll understand why complaining is addictive, what happens in the brain of those who keep complaining, how negative words work like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and, most importantly, what to do to reverse it before it's too late. If you've said today, "I can't take it anymore, nothing works out for me, I'm just like that," or any variation of these phrases, this video was made for you, and you needed to find it today. Why you complain without realizing it, and why it's more addictive than any drug. Let me ask you an uncomfortable question. How long has it been since you woke up today? And how many times have you complained about something? Traffic? From the boss? Of time? From the account that won? Of the son who doesn't stop? From the husband who doesn't help? From the wife who demands too much? From the government? From the neighbor? From the slow internet? The body that hurts? Of life that tires? If you stop to count and the number was greater than 0 before lunch, you're not alone. But you need to listen to what I'm going to tell you now very carefully, because it changes everything. Complaining is an addiction. And like any addiction, it gives you pleasure while destroying you inside. This is not a metaphor, it's biology. When you complain, your brain releases a small dose of dopamine, the same neurotransmitter associated with pleasure, reward, satisfaction. It's the same mechanism that acts when you eat chocolate, when you get a like on social media, when someone agrees with you in an argument. Complaint generates pleasure, a small, quick, almost imperceptible, but real pleasure. And what does the brain do with experiences that generate pleasure? He wants to repeat. It creates a neural pathway, a trail. And the more you travel this trail, the wider it gets, the easier it is, the more automatic, to the point where you don't even realize you're complaining anymore, because you've become the default path of your mind. This is exactly how any addiction works. The smoker does not light up the cigarette thinking, I'm going to get addicted. It lights up because it relieves, calms, gives a sense of control in a moment of tension. The chronic complainer does not wake up thinking, today I will destroy myself with words. He complains because it relieves, because it generates empathy from others, because it gives a feeling that at least someone understands his pain. But there is a cruel detail in this story. The relief is temporary. The destruction is permanent. Researchers at Stanford University studied the effect of repetitive complaining on the brain and came to a frightening conclusion. The more you complain, the more you train your brain to see problems. Not because the problems increase, but because the brain literally starts filtering reality in search of confirmations for what you have already repeated so many times. In technical language, this is called confirmation bias combined with negative neuroplasticity. In human language, it means this: you teach your brain to only see what is bad, and he learns, fast and well. That's why there are people who win the lottery and in 2 years are broke and more unhappy than before. The problem was never the money. It was the mental pattern. It was the inner voice. It was what came out of my mouth every day. And there's something even more disturbing about this equation. Complaining creates a social circle. It attracts people who also complain. Because misery loves company, as the Americans say. And when you're surrounded by people who only see the bad side of everything, your brain gets confirmation all the time that it's the right way to see the world. You start complaining, find someone who agrees. That reinforces his vision. You complain more. It attracts more people alike, and the cycle closes, tighter and tighter, increasingly difficult to escape. Now think with me. A person in this cycle, complaining every day, with friends who complain, with a mind trained to see the worst. What is the real probability that this person will see an opportunity when it appears? To act with courage when you need to believe that you deserve better, almost zero. Not because she's stupid, not because she is weak, but because addiction has already taken over her operating system. And the hardest and most liberating step is exactly what you're taking right now, realizing that addiction exists, because you can't let go of something you don't even know you're holding. What happens in your brain? When you talk badly about your own life, imagine that you have a personal assistant available 24/7 who never sleeps, never rests, never questions your orders, and executes absolutely everything you tell him to do. No filter, no judgment, no hesitation. Sounds great, right? Now imagine that this assistant is unable to distinguish sarcasm from truth, unable to understand that when you say, "My life is hell," you are just venting. Unable to realize that when you say, "I can never get anything," you are just frustrated, not making an official statement about your future. Such an assistant exists. He lives inside you, and it is called subconscious. Modern psychology, especially cognitive neuroscience, has demonstrated quite solidly that the human brain operates on two simultaneous levels: the conscious, which is the part that reasons, questions, analyzes, And the subconscious, which is the part that executes, automates, creates patterns, and repeats them over and over again. Conscious consciousness represents approximately 5% of brain activity. The subconscious, the other 95%. In other words, the part you actively control is a tiny fraction of what actually drives your life. Most of your decisions, reactions, beliefs, and behaviors come from a place that you don't even consciously access. And that has been programmed over the years mainly by what you have repeated with emotion. And what have you repeated with the most emotion in your life? The complaints. The I can't. I don't deserve it. It's no use. It won't work. Every time you say these phrases with conviction, with feeling, with that mixture of anger and tiredness that only those who are on the edge know, you are recording. It's programming. It's sending a direct instruction to the 95% of the brain that will operate on autopilot for the rest of the day, the week, the month, the year. And the subconscious doesn't argue. He implements. There is a fascinating concept in neuroscience called RAS, Reticular Activating System. It is a network of neurons in the brainstem whose function is basically to filter reality, because your brain receives about 11 million bits of information per second through your senses, but it can only consciously process about 50 bits per second. Someone needs to decide what passes and what does not pass. That someone is the RAS. And he decides based on one thing, what you believe to be important, true, and relevant to you. In other words, what you programmed with your repeated words. If you spend years telling you that you're unlucky, your RAS will filter out reality and show you evidence of bad luck. The opportunities that appear will go unnoticed because they do not match the installed program. The problems will be amplified because they confirm the program. If you change the program, the filter changes, and suddenly you start to see things that have always been there, but that you just didn't see. This is not magical thinking. It's the way the brain literally works. And there is another layer to this story that few people know. When you badmouth your own life, especially out loud with intense emotion, your body releases cortisol, the stress hormone. And cortisol in high and frequent doses has documented physical effects. It weakens the immune system, compromises memory, impairs decision-making, increases anxiety, and favors depression. You literally get sick with your own words. It is not spiritual, it's physiological, it's chemistry. It is your body obeying the command that your mouth has issued. The question that remains is simple and devastating at the same time. If your words have so much power over your brain, over your body, over the way you see the world, what exactly have you been building with them every day? You're not venting, you're cursing yourself. Everyone has heard or said a version of this phrase, "Let me vent. I need to get this off my chest." And it sounds healthy, right? It even seems necessary. The entire popular culture confirms this. Talking is good. Keeping it inside is worse. Whoever is silent consents. But there is a very fine line, and very dangerous, between venting and reinforcing. And most people cross that line without realizing it. Every day, several times a day. Genuine outburst has a real psychological function. When you go through something difficult, naming it, expressing it, sharing it with someone you trust, that processes the emotion. It's cathartic. It is necessary. Psychology completely validates this process. But what psychology also says, and that no one tells you, is that this process has a duration. A healthy outburst happens, is welcomed, and releases. The emotion is processed, and you move on more clearly. What most people do, however, is completely different. They don't vent once, they repeat. They tell the same story to 5 different people. They revisit the same problem every morning. They remember the same pain every night. They have been feeding the same narrative for weeks, months, sometimes years. This is not an outburst, this is rumination. And rumination is one of the psychological patterns most associated with depression, chronic anxiety, and the feeling of paralysis that prevents people from changing their lives. Every time you tell that story again of when you were treated badly at work, when the relationship ended, when life played a trick on you, you're not suing, you are re-experiencing. You're sending your nervous system back to that moment with the same emotional intensity, activating the same stress hormones, reinforcing the same neural connections. You're literally hurting yourself again, on purpose, without realizing it. And there is something even more serious happening in this process. Every time you tell a version of your story where you're the victim, where everything went wrong, where the world conspires against you, you're cementing an identity. You're telling your brain who you are, and the brain, always faithful to the program, will work tirelessly to keep you consistent with this identity. Because the human brain has a very strong drive for consistency. He'd rather you stay who he believes you are, even if it's bad for you, than face the dissonance of an identity change. This explains why there are people who, even after years of therapy, reading, courses, self-knowledge, are still stuck in the same patterns. Because the conscious discourse has changed, but the narrative that he repeats every day, in conversations with friends, in the internal monologue, in the loose phrases that come out of his mouth on automatic, has not changed. The mouth kept cursing as the mind tried to evolve. And here comes the spiritual dimension that cannot be ignored. Traditions such as Judaism, Buddhism, Stoicism, and various currents of Christianity converge on one point. Words have ontological weight. They don't just describe reality, they participate in building it. In the book of Proverbs, one of the oldest texts of humanity, it is written, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue." It's not poetry, it's a statement about causality. In Buddhism, right speech is one of the pillars of the Eightfold Path, because the Buddha understood that words shape perception, and perception shapes experience. Spirituality and neuroscience reach, by different paths, the same conclusion. You're not just talking about your life, you're creating it. And if your words today are of scarcity, of failure, of pain, of impossibility, what exactly are you creating? The everyday phrases that are blocking everything good in your life. Now I'll give you a list, and I want you to read it honestly. Not as someone who is judging others, but like someone who is looking in the mirror. I'm never lucky. It's always like that with me. There's no point in trying. I'm just like that, I don't change. My life has always been difficult. I wasn't born for this. Money is not for me. Good love only exists in film. I knew it was going to go wrong. Nobody values me. How many of these have you said this week? These phrases seem harmless. They seem just expressions of everyday life, ways of communicating frustration, ways of saying that life is heavy. But each of them carries a built-in program, an instruction, a belief that repeated with frequency and emotion becomes the lens through which you see absolutely everything. Let's dissect some of them. I'm never lucky. When you say this, you're instructing your brain to ignore the evidence of luck and amplify the evidence of bad luck. Remember the reticular activator system we talked about earlier? He springs into action immediately. He begins to filter reality to confirm his belief. And all of a sudden it really is. You're not lucky because you can't see when you have it anymore. I'm just like that. I don't change. This one is particularly devastating because it is not just a complaint, it is a declaration of surrender. It closes the door on any possibility of transformation, and the brain, which loves consistency, treats it as a standing order. Keep that person exactly as they are. Neuroscience has proven through the concept of neuroplasticity that the human brain can change at any age. New neural connections can be formed. Old standards can be rewritten. Biology does not condemn you to be who you are today, but your words can. Money is not for me. This phrase is one of the most common among people living in chronic financial scarcity, and it creates a cruel paradox. The person wants to prosper, but every time an opportunity arises, the subconscious, which has been programmed to believe that money is not for them, finds a way to sabotage. He forgets to make the call, procrastina the project. He believes that it will go wrong before he even tries. It is not a lack of competence, it's a program running in the background. Nobody values me. This phrase, repeated frequently, begins to change the way you position yourself in relationships. You start looking for confirmation that you are not valued. Interprets neutral behaviors as rejection. He acts in ways that unconsciously push people away. And then the prophecy is fulfilled. This is called self-fulfilling prophecy, one of the best documented psychological phenomena in history. You believe in something, you act on that belief, and the environment responds by confirming what you believed. And the trigger of all this is the phrase you repeat. But the most important point of all this is not just recognizing the toxic phrases. It is to understand where they came from. Most of the limiting beliefs that inhabit an adult's mouth were installed in childhood, by a father who said that life is hard, by a mother who repeated that they were not from a rich family, by a teacher who said you weren't good enough, for a society that teaches from an early age that dreaming too much is naive, you've grown up. But the phrases remained, and now you repeat them as if they were universal truths, when in fact they are just inherited programming that has never been questioned. The good news, and it is very good, is that everything that has been programmed can be deprogrammed. Everything that has been learned can be unlearned. Every neural track that was built by negative repetition can be replaced by a new track, built by positive repetition. But the first step is to stop thinking that the phrases are harmless. They are not. They never were. Why negative people attract the very thing they fear most. There is a cruel irony in the lives of people who live in the negative mode. They are afraid of suffering, and they suffer more. They are afraid of losing, and they lose more. They are afraid of being abandoned, and they drive people away. They are afraid of failure, and they sabotage their own success. It is not divine punishment. It's no coincidence. It's not bad luck. It is a precise, predictable, and, once understood, completely reversible psychological mechanism. Let's start with the most obvious, and even then, what surprises people the most when they realize the energy you project determines what you attract in relationships. This is not the law of attraction in the mystical sense. It is basic social psychology. Humans are social animals that are extremely sensitive to nonverbal cues. In less than a second of contact, another person's brain has already processed your posture, your facial expression, the tone of your voice, the way you occupy space, and has made a decision about how it will relate to you. A person who carries with them a narrative of victimization, of failure, of distrust, projects this onto the body, on the slumped shoulders, in the avoidant look, in the low voice and without energy, in the way of entering a room, and the people around them respond to these signals, often without even realizing that they are responding. Professional opportunities tend to go to those who project confidence, not to those who project doubt. Healthy relationships tend to emerge for those who project security, not for those who project neediness. Doors tend to open for those who seem to believe they deserve to be opened. And what you design comes in large part from what you repeat internally, of the phrases that circulate in your head, of the stories you tell about yourself. Now let's move on to the deeper and more disturbing layer. Psychology calls the identity comfort zone the set of experiences that your brain considers normal for you, even when those experiences are bad, even when they cause pain. If they are familiar, if they match the identity that has been built over the years, the brain prefers them to the unknown of something better. This explains why there are people who leave an abusive relationship and enter another one like it. Because there are people who change jobs and reproduce exactly the same toxic dynamic in the new place. Because there are people who receive an incredible opportunity and somehow find a way to destroy it. It's not stupidity. It's not a lack of will. It is the brain seeking consistency with the internal program. And what is the fuel that keeps this program active? The words you use to describe who you are. I always get along badly in relationships. At work, they never recognize my value. When it looks like it's going to get better, there's always something to spoil. Each of these sentences is a confirmation of identity, an instruction for autopilot, an order made to the subconscious. Bring me more of the same. And the subconscious, faithful and efficient, delivers. There is a concept of positive psychology called learned helplessness. It was studied by psychologist Martin Seligman and describes the state in which a person, after repeated experiences of failure or pain, begins to believe that he has no control over what happens to him, and stops trying even when the situation changes and the possibility of success is real. The chronic negative person often lives in a state of learned helplessness, not because the world really conspires against it, but because she learned, through her own words, repeated thousands of times, that good things are not for her. And as long as this belief is installed, no course, no opportunity, no miracle will be enough, because the problem is not out there, it's in the mouth, it's in the mind, it's on the program. How to change what comes out of your mouth and change what comes into your life. We have reached the point that everyone has been waiting for, and that everyone fears at the same time. Because this is where the comfortable part of watching a video ends, and the uncomfortable part of actually switching begins. And before giving you any practical tools, I need to tell you something that most self-help content doesn't have the courage to say. Changing the pattern of your speech is not easy. It's not fast, and it doesn't happen with forced positivity. If you've come this far expecting me to say, just think positive and everything will change, you've come to the wrong place. Positive thinking without real work is just humorous denial. It's changing "my life is rubbish" to "everything will be fine" without changing anything underneath. And the subconscious is not stupid. He notices the incoherence, and he rejects the new program. What works is different. It is deeper. And it starts with something simple but radical. Radical consciousness. The first step is not to change what you say. It's understanding what you say. Most negative people are unaware of the volume and intensity of their complaints. They are too automatic, too fast, too integrated into the personality to be noticed the moment they happen. So the most powerful exercise you can do today, even today, is simple. Pick a day and treat every claim as a financial transaction. Each time you complain, you pay an imaginary amount. Write it down on a piece of paper, a count. At the end of the day, look at the number. Let it shock you, because he will. This shock is the beginning of consciousness, and without awareness, no change is possible. The second step is to question the narrative, not suppress it. When the phrase "it will never work" comes up, don't immediately replace it with "it will work." This is suppression, and it creates resistance. Instead, ask, is this absolutely true? Is there any evidence that it has worked before? What is the most honest and least catastrophic version of this situation? This is what cognitive behavioral therapy calls cognitive restructuring. It is not denying the problem. It is to refuse the dramatic distortion that turns an obstacle into a death sentence. The third step is to replace patterns, not just words. Instead of, "I'm never lucky," try, "I'm still learning to recognize opportunities." Instead of, "No one values me," try, "I haven't found the right people yet," or "I haven't communicated my value in the right way." Notice the difference. It is not empty positivity. It's a narrative that holds accountability and keeps the door open for change. The fourth step, and perhaps the most powerful, is to take care of the environment. You don't change the pattern of your speech if you continue to be surrounded by people whose only subject is to complain. Just as it is very difficult to quit smoking living with smokers, it is very difficult to change the vocal pattern by living in a bubble of negativity. This does not mean abandoning people, but it means creating intentional exposure to environments, conversations, and people that operate on another level. Different podcasts, different books, conversations with people who solve problems instead of just describing them. The brain learns by imitation. Take care of what you imitate. And the fifth step, which closes everything, is the simplest and most ignored of all. Start speaking well of your life, even if it's a lie at first. I'm not saying to deny your problems. I'm saying to start narrating too what's working, which has improved, what you got, which surprised you positively. The brain that has been trained to see only the bad needs to be retrained to see the whole. And this happens through the intentional repetition of a more complete, fairer, more real narrative. Over time, and it's not a long time, neuroplasticity works fast when you're consistent. What once seemed forced starts to feel natural. The filter changes, the RAS begins to deliver different evidence, and life, which didn't change overnight, starts to look different, until the actions generated by this new perception create results that are really different. Your mouth was your enemy for a long time. It's time for her to become your greatest ally. And it all starts with the next sentence you choose to say.